common rarity cards are the most plentiful and simple cards in the game, to the point where most casual players are able to unpack all of them by the time each expansion cycle ends. That isn't to say they're weak by any means though, as you'll soon find out. Almost every single card on this list has been nerfed or moved to the Hall of Fame at some point, which is Hearthstone's version of the ban list. So in this video we're going over the best common cards in the game, selecting one card to represent each of the 10 classes. And at number 10, for the Hunter class, we have Rapid Fire. This 1-mana spell lets you deal 1 damage and has Twin Spell, which is a keyword which adds an extra copy of that card to your hand after you cast it. Almost every single Twin Spell card that has ever been printed over the years has been overpriced, but most of them still manage to be quite good. You see, the way Blizzard balanced Twin Spell cards was by adding a 1-mana tax to having the keyword, since it essentially puts you +1 in card advantage if you manage to use both halves of the spell. And although cards like Air Raid and Rapid Fire have alternatives that cost 1 mana less, or significantly less in the case of Blessing of the Ancients, all of these cards have seen play at one point or another. So why did we choose Rapid Fire to represent the Hunter class instead of Starving Buzzard, which was recently reverted to its game-breaking state from Alpha? Or Explosive Trap, which has been in nearly every single Hunter deck? Well, even though Rapid Fire hasn't been out for that long, it's also the main reason why Hunter's best overall deck to date has been so consistent and powerful. Questline Hunter, which is a deck centered around playing spells that deal damage, loved playing any damage spell so they could turbo out their quest reward, Tavish Master Marksman, which, for the rest of the game, lets you reuse your 0-mana hero power every time you cast a spell. In total, the questline requires you to play 6 damaging spells and upgrade your hero power with each step. And since Rapid Fire essentially gives you 2 1-mana spells that deal damage for the price of only drawing 1 card, if you drew Rapid Fire, you were almost guaranteed to drop a turn 5 Tavish and win the game on the spot. And once you were in the machine gun form, no deck, even in Wild, could stop the insane amount of burst damage this deck provided. Odd Questline Hunter was especially notorious for this, since with a 3 damage hero power provided by Baku at the start of the game, and a ton of ways to draw spells, this deck could easily deal over 45 face damage during a game if needed. Rapid Fire even had to be reworked to cost 2 mana and deal 2 damage just so Odd Questline Hunter couldn't play it. Even that wasn't enough though, and variants of Questline Hunter still continue to see play in Wild to this day. As ridiculous as this might initially sound, Questline Hunter is probably the weakest tier 1 deck any of these common cards has helped make on here, which is funny considering it dominated the Standard and Wild ladder for months. The rest of this list is just filled with such insane cards that I had to only place Rapid Fire at 10th, but it is by no means bad. And speaking of twin cards, and at number 9, for the Demon Hunter class, we have Twin Slice. This 0-mana spell gives your hero +1 attack this turn and adds a second slice to your hand, which is also a 0-mana spell that gives your hero +1 attack. This card essentially works exactly like if it had the Twin Spell keyword on it, but I think Blizzard didn't want to include an expansion-specific keyword on a card in the first Demon Hunter set. Demon Hunter was Hearthstone's 10th class and was added 6 years after launch in early 2020, and to compensate for having so few cards, Blizzard decided to make the class pretty good. This pick for the Demon Hunter class was actually really hard because pretty much every card in the initial set was nerfed within just a couple of weeks, and they weren't just decent or strong. In Standard, the sole tier 1 deck until a critical mass of cards been nerfed was variations of Tempo Demon Hunter, which tried to cram as many broken cards into it as possible. One of the main win conditions of this deck, if it somehow ever managed to lose board control, was to use an Ultra Skull combo. Ultras has the effect where he dealt 1 damage to all enemies after you casted the leftmost or rightmost card in your hand. And unlike other card games where you can freely shuffle your hand, not being able to was now a core part of the Hearthstone class. With Ultras and the insane mana discounting and card draw provided by pre-nerf Skull, it was very easy to deal over 5 damage to all enemies in a single turn. The only real limitation was if you ever had expensive cards clog up your leftmost and rightmost slot in your hand, but that wasn't an issue with Twin Slice, since the second slice card you generated always got added to the rightmost side of your hand. And while Twin Slice was amazing as a combo continuer in Standard, after its nerf to its current state, it inadvertently made Demon Hunter the best deck in Wild instead. This new deck was called Odd Demon Hunter, and used exclusively odd costed cards, like Twin Slice, so that Baku could upgrade its basic hero power at the start of the game. And with the combination of an insanely efficient hero power, other busted Demon Hunter cards, and an insane amount of burst potential, this deck became a very solid tier 1 deck in Wild, even after several rounds of nerfs. Since the current Twin Slice adds a second slice to your hand, you don't have to commit both parts if you just want to use one half to kill a small minion or save it for a different turn. Either way, every deck loved the cheap burst damage and removal flexibility it provided, and nearly every single Demon Hunter deck, whether it be combo, tempo, or control, ran it at some point. Not many cards can say they saw more play in Wild after getting supposedly nerfed, but because Demon Hunter as a whole hasn't been doing so great as of lately, Twin Slice can only make the number 8 slot on this list. And at number 8 for the Rogue class, we have Shadow Step. This 0 mana spell lets you return a friendly minion to your hand and makes it also cost 2 mana less. This card, for as common as it is in other card games, is just as amazing in Hearthstone as you would expect. Out of all the classes in Hearthstone, Rogues are mostly known for their insane tempo plays and one-turn kill combos that they can manage to pull out of thin air. Luckily, Shadow Step was the glue that held both of these types of decks together ever since beta. Picking Shadow Step as the best Rogue common was honestly a really hard pick, since a lot of Rogue staples like Backstab and Eviscerate have seen a similar amount of play. But after thinking about it, Shadow Step has enabled and been included in most of Rogue's really strong decks. In Alpha, Shadow Step was a big reason why Miracle decks, basically the only competitive deck Rogues had for a long time, was able to combo so many cards together with Auctioneer or beef up a 2020 Edwin. Even in Classic format, an Evergreen format where only cards from that set are allowed, Miracle Rogue is by far the best deck in the higher ranks because of how much potential burst damage it can do when piloted by a skilled player. Later on, it also helped create one of the most controversial decks in the game, Caverns Rogue. This deck centered around playing 4 minions with the exact same name, and gave you a reward which set the stats of all of your minions to become 5/5. This deck was insane, and only limited by how lucky you can get drawing duplicate minions from your deck. Luckily, with the help of Shadow Step, it became trivially easy to bounce minions back and forth from your hand to finish the quest by turn 5. And with the help of multiple 5/5 boars that could attack immediately, you basically had to hope that your opponent didn't get lucky or knew how to play the game. And even fairly recently, Shadow Step helped Rogues rebuild their former glory by enabling Pillager Rogue, which was one of the best decks in Wild for a good amount of time. This deck, like all the previous ones, required you to play as many cards as possible in a single turn, so that Spectral Pillager could deal direct damage to your opponent. And in addition to letting you repeat a minion's battlecry for 2 mana less, to make the whole combo go over smoother, it also lets you reduce the cost of a crucial minion for your combo turn. In fact, a pretty common play was a Shadow Step Scams with a Spirit of the Shark to effectively gain you 12 free mana to easily clear 30 damage with Spectral Pillager's effect. While it wasn't as glamorous as a card as Fillet Fighter or Conceal, Shadow Step was a core card that made every degenerate combo rogue deck that much better. And at number 7, for the Warrior class, we have N'Zoth's First Mate. This 1 mana 1/1 pirate equips your hero with a vanilla 1/3 weapon. This card, along with Bloodsail Cultists, were the first non-rogue and non-neutral pirates to ever be printed. So if you hate playing against Pirate Warrior and 90% of modern aggro decks, you have these two to thank. N'Zoth's First Mate, soon after the standard Wild Ladder split occurred, was mostly played in Temple Warriors and Dragon Warriors, just because of how good they were for taking early game board control. N'Zoth's First Mate in particular was great at this since it offered a 1/1 body on board and a 1/3 weapon that could trade into and kill most opposing 1-drops your opponent tried to put out. And while there was some pirate support cards at the time, N'Zoth's First Mate really took off after the OG version of Patches was first printed. At the time, Patches was a 1 mana 1/1 pirate that summoned itself from your deck after you played any pirate and could attack immediately. And if you think this card is just another bad legendary, like almost every single big YouTuber did at the time, you'd be on the same boat. Unfortunately, Patches, even after getting nerfed, is still one of the best cards of all time and is arguably the most influential. This little pirate shaped how every single aggro, control, and combo deck has built their deck ever since his release. The main draw of him is the numerous things he does for you with a simple effect. For one, he gives you a free 1/1 stats when you first play a pirate, which is extremely crucial on the first turn of the game when every stat point matters. He also thins your deck by 1 card, which may not sound like a lot, but does in Hearthstone where every deck only contains 30 cards. But in order to improve your odds of drawing a specific card and drastically improving your early game, he needs to be pulled out by another pirate as soon as possible. And with N'Zoth's First Mate, you can effectively establish 2/2 worth of stats, have a 1/3 weapon you can immediately swing with, and thin your deck for all just 1 mana. This 1-turn play, along with a myriad of amazing pirate and weapon synergy cards, has allowed Pirate Warrior to consistently be tier 1 or 2, despite the ever-increasing power creep of the game. It's really hard to overstate how prevalent and dominant Pirate Warrior has been in the game's history, since it's existed in some form or another for the past 5 years. In fact, N'Zoth's First Mate has been in every single version of Pirate Warrior ever since it was printed, with its latest deck inclusion being in Questline Warrior. This version of Pirate Warrior especially loved N'Zoth's First Mate, since it's the only way they can equip weapons besides Ankar. In the end, I chose not to give Blood Deckhand, which was arguably stronger after its buff, because it didn't inspire Blizzard to print more Pirate Warrior cards, unlike N'Zoth's First Mate, and was quickly reverted. And at number 6, for the Paladin class, we have Righteous Protector. This 1 mana 1/1 has Taunt, a keyword which forces all enemies to attack it, and Divine Shield, a keyword which negates the first amount of damage it takes. Taunt and Divine Shield on their own aren't really the best keywords to put on a minion, but together they make for a really good combo. Taunt on its own nowadays has really fallen off, since most of them can be one-shotted by a huge attacker and offer pretty much no value. But with Divine Shield, it requires at least 2 attacks to get through, even from 2 huge attackers. There's a good reason a Noyotron has seen so much play over the years, but Righteous Protector takes it one step further. Only sacrificing 1 health point to cost a whole 1 mana cheaper, Righteous Protector is essentially a 1 mana 2/2 with Taunt and requires 2 attacks to kill it. This is an amazing deal, and was a good reason why it saw a ton of play in Paladin decks that wanted a good early game buff target, a cheap stalling minion, or a way to contest the early game board. Righteous Protector did it all, and most notably saw play in Odd Paladin, Pure Paladin, Hand Buff Paladin, and Cheese Paladin. In Wild, she saw staple play as a way to protect the board of Silverhand recruits Odd Paladin would summon with their hero power, and annoying opposing aggro decks. And while she couldn't stop board clears, the protection she did provide was often enough to close out games with buffed up recruits. While Odd Paladin wasn't the most popular deck, it did boast some of the highest win rates in Wild at times, preying on every deck without at least 3 ways to deal with a board full of 1/1s. And after she was reintroduced into the core set, which let her be playable in Standard again, she saw play as the premier 1-drop of the format. With a ton of good buff cards in the format and very few good silence cards, she was guaranteed to have utility. Even now in Wild, she combos really well with other Paladin staples, like Grimsteed Outfitter and Hand of Adal, which could both buff Righteous Protector to be a major early game threat. As you'll soon see, when a card is great in the early game and great in the late game, you know that it's an amazing card. And at number 5, for the Shaman class, we have Ice Fishing. This 2-mana spell simply lets you draw 2 Murlocs when played. This card, unlike a lot of the other cards of this list, is actually pretty weak independently, but is here for a good reason. Although you may think of typical Murlocs as being weak, bad minions, Blizzard has actually been printing some very good expensive ones that aren't meant for typical Murloc decks. The real reason that Ice Fishing is in the top 5 on this list is because of a 2 Murloc combo involving Fire Mancer Fergal and Toxaphene. Most aggro decks typically only have 2 instant lose conditions, when their opponent plays Reno Jackson, or when their opponent kills them. Ice Fishing, on the other hand, introduced a 3rd potential lose condition for Shamans to abuse against every single deck out there because of how insane the combo is. Basically, the only setup for these was 2 specific Murlocs in your deck and playing Ice Fishing when you needed to. Then, on the combo turn, all you had to do was play Flurgle, a 2-mana Murloc which dealt 1 damage to all enemies after you played a Murloc, and Toxaphene, a 1-mana Murloc that gives another friendly Murloc Poisonous, an effect which lets a minion destroy any other minion it damages. So since Hearthstone processes battle cries before whenever it triggers, Toxaphene's battle cry would first give Flurgle Poisonous. Then the game would register that a Murloc was played, then Flurgle's effect would trigger. And since Flurgle would deal 1 damage to all enemy minions, damaging them, they would all be poisonous and die instantly to Flurgle's effect. It was essentially a 2-card, 3-mana combo which cleared only your opponent's board, and left you with a 1/2 and a 2/3 minion with Poisonous. And unlike other card games, there are no effects that stop Poisonous from killing your minions in Hearthstone, unless they have Divine Shield, making this combo as inevitable as it is unstoppable. Not only does it thin your deck by 2 cards, which is one of the main reasons why Patches is so good, as we've explained earlier, but a 1-card, 5-mana, 1-sided board clear is still unmatched by any other class or card combination, period. You could even play Ice Fishing on turn 2 and play the Flurgle Toxaphene board clear as early as turn 3 if you really need a board clear. And while this combo is very new and hasn't seen as much play as other aggro Shaman cards, like Tunnel Trog, Totem Golem, and Crackle, the only good Shaman decks seen play right now are free Shaman variants, which all use Ice Fishing package as a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was honestly really hard picking the best common Shaman card since almost every good Shaman deck is so different from the last one. But like our other choices, we rank cards higher depending on how powerful the format it was played in, and for how long it was played for. And since Flurgle Toxaphene combo has made every deck more weary about building a huge board against Shamans, I think Ice Fishing deserves to be called the best common Shaman card. And at number 4, for the Druid class, we have Oaken Summons. This 4-mana spell gives you 6 armor, which is additional health for your hero, and directly summons a minion from your deck that cost 4 or less mana. When Oaken Summons was first printed, it was sort of brushed aside as a niche control tool, since the best target for it, at the time, was Ironwood Golem. The great thing about unconditional summons in card games, though, is that as more and more cards get printed, the more likely they are to become better over time, and that's exactly what happened when Zoldrak Ritualist was first printed. which effectively made Oaken Summons a 4 mana 3/9 that gives you 6 armor, since battle cries don't trigger in Hearthstone if a minion is cheated out. And even though you had the chance to draw patches, a term Hearthstone players use for drawing useless cards that you want to keep in your deck, this small combo was so good at stopping aggro decks that almost every non-aggro druid started running this package. But what really propelled Oaken Summons onto this list is after Injured Marauder and Archmage Vargoth were printed a couple of years later. Injured Marauder was just a bigger and beefier version of Zul'Drak Ritualist. That was much better to play if you did happen to draw it, while Vargoth was just a generically good card that could repeat a spell you cast that turn. And if played as early as turn 4, Oaken Summons would, ideally, pull Vargoth from your deck, it would recast Oaken Summons since it was the only spell you played that turn, pull a full health Marauder from your deck, all while netting you 12 armor. While this is basically a game-winning play against most aggro decks, the fact that Oakens creates a very threatening 5/10 that can quickly kill your opponent, summons a 2/6 must-kill target, and nets you an insane amount of armor, all for just 4 mana, definitely makes it one of the most proactive plays you can make in the game. And even though you have the chance to whiff by summoning the Marauder first, or by drawing all of your 4 costs, or if you ever include any of the minions that cost 4 or less mana, when this chain reaction does go off, it's still nearly unstoppable. In fact, this combo is the main reason why druids are able to play such slow, stally decks in Wild, while having virtually no early game. All they have to do is survive the early game is to mana ramp as fast as possible, draw cards, and play Oaken Summons to completely stabilize against aggro decks. That's not even mentioning how a single turn with an untouched Vargoth can completely ruin your opponent's game, since a couple of good repeated spells can also just win you the game. These days, Druid is doing quite well. But this was another hard pick because of how many good rarity staples there are in Wild, but I ultimately decided on including Oaken for its massive swing potential and increasing relevance in Druid over the past couple of years. And at number 3, for the Priest class, we have Northshire Cleric. This 1 mana 1/3 minion has the effect where, whenever a friendly or enemy minion is healed, you get to draw a card. This card is probably one of the most busted cards of all time that still hasn't gotten a nerf yet, and for good reason. In addition to being a 1 mana 1/3, which by the way is the best stat line on a 1 mana card which they can have, has a perfect ability that synergizes with its stat line and class. Cleric is still truly one of the most splashable cards in the game that can be played in nearly every good priest deck. At worst, Cleric can go 1-for-1 with most 1-drops and trading evenly against 2/2s. In practice though, 1/1s and 2/1s are extremely common because of the prevalence of pirates, meaning Cleric can very often go 2-for-1, and with the help from the Priest Hero Power, healing your Cleric for 2 health, keeping it alive, and drawing a card for 2 mana is very much worth it, and was the main method Priests used to stall during different metas. For that reason, Priests and Control players alike loved the grindy controlled nature of Cleric, who could very often stay alive during an entire game, drawing cards for you while you healed your other minions. A fan favorite combo was to play Wild Pyromancer, which dealt 1 damage to all minions whenever you played a spell, and Circle of Healing, which healed all minions for 4, while a Cleric was on the board to kill 1 health minions and draw a ton of cards. You see, although Priests are able to generate cards and value from keeping their minions alive, there really aren't that many ways to just draw cards in Priests. This was a huge part of why most good Priest decks needed a way to generate extra cards. Otherwise, they tend to just run out of steam. In fact, she was one of the only reasons why Reno Priest thrived for so long in Wild, since she stalled in the early game and offered much needed card draw in the late game. This is another Titan deck in Wild that existed for so long, people were certain that it would exist in some form or another until the game died. This deck basically revolved around playing Shadow Reaper Anduin to get Void Form hero power, which let you deal 2 damage and refresh every time you played a card, Razah the Chained to make Void Form cost 0, and a ton of cheat cards. The idea was that with a free Void Form and a ton of cheap cards, you could machine gun down your opponent from full health, which could happen very quickly. Nowadays though, her high health is extremely valuable in Inner Fire Priest and not much else. This new and improved deck basically tries to buff up the health of an early game minion as much as possible, double it a couple of times with Divine Spirit, set the minion's attack to equal its health, and crash into their opponent for a 1-turn kill. It just so happens that this deck's damage is exponential, so any extra health they can get, like on a Northshire Cleric, makes every minion this deck puts out a threat. And because of her integral role in basically every old school Razakis and Inner Fire Priest deck, she definitely deserves a spot on this list, even if Power Word Shield is a very close second. And at number 2, for the Mage class, we have Sorcerer's Apprentice. This 2 mana 3/2 simply makes every spell cost 1 mana less to play while this minion is on the field. This should be no surprise to anyone that's played Mage before Apprentice's harsh nerf, since a flat mana discount on all spells for just 2 mana is absolutely insane. This is probably by far the worst example of mana cheating, a term Hearthstone players have for paying way less for an effect that's intended, completely dominating the direction of a class has gone towards ever since the game's release. While on paper, it may seem like discounting the cost of spells by only 1 mana may not seem like such a big deal, especially since Priest has their own version that has seen significantly less play. What Priest doesn't have, though, is access to an insane number of good spells and spell synergy cards that Mage does. This card was a must-include in nearly every Tempo Mage, Combo Mage, Quest Mage, and otherwise gimmicky Mage deck out there. At first, when spells weren't as powerful as they are now, Apprentice was played as a good proactive 2-drop that had the chance to cheat out some of your biggest spells sooner if it managed to survive on board. The first real friend that made Apprentice insane was Flamewaker, which was a 3-mana minion that randomly dealt 2 damage to enemies whenever you casted a spell. And while a 3-mana cost to randomly deal 2 damage may not seem that good, with just 1 Sorcerer's Apprentice and a couple of 1-mana spells, an old-school Tempo Mage could easily have the momentum to win by turn 5. And as Mage got more and more support cards that shored up all of their weaknesses, like having bad 1-mana cards and running out of steam too quickly, Apprentice was there the whole time ensuring you could play your entire hand and kill your opponent in 1 turn. All of this culminated in Quest Mage, which was one of the few S-tier decks in the game's history that still remained a tier 1 in Wild for years after getting nerfed, which is still unmatched to this day. Quest Mage was a combo deck that required you to cast spells that didn't start in your deck in order to get the reward Time Warp, which gave you an extra turn. This deck was broken beyond belief due to how fast the quest could be completed by the critical mass of spell generation cards in Mage, the insane mana discounts Apprentice could get off of each game, and the complete uncounterable win condition where they could pummel you with giants on their next turn. And years later, after Quest Mage finally got nuked into the ground, extremely fast OTK decks continued to dominate the Wild ladder because of how cheap it was to cast 20 plus spells in a single turn. These decks revolved around Flamewaker's Apprentice combos and Mozaki Apprentice combos, almost always ending the game by turn 6. With the insane number of ways to draw cards for free, reduce the cost of spells, or even generate mana for free, this deck abused Apprentice's effect until she finally got nerfed. I honestly can't think of a single other card I've seen more than Sorcerer's Apprentice. The only reason this card isn't at number 1 though, is because the next card has been in even more broken decks in that class that has completely outmatched the first 5 cards on this list. And at number 1 for the Warlock class, we have Kobold Librarian. This 1 mana 2/1 minion simply has the effect where it deals 2 damage to your hero and draws a card. Yes, it might surprise you to find out that this meek looking kobold is the best non-neutral common minion in the entire game. This card is truly the most splashable card ever, since I can't think of a single Warlock deck that doesn't want to run him, unless they have certain deck restrictions. It may look like just a 1 mana 2/1 with the Warlock hero power attached, but having this on a card is absolutely insane for cycling through your deck. Drawing a card is worth about 1.5 mana, so any card that can draw you a card for 1 mana is already an amazing deal. Like mentioned, all Hearthstone decks must contain 30 cards, meaning there's an added premium for being able to search through all of your cards quickly. That's the reason why cards with tradable, a keyword which lets you mulligan that card for 1 mana, are still considered to be so good, even if they aren't truly drawing you a new card. This card has so much going for it that it's honestly shocking that it only costs 1 mana. The fact that including 2 of them basically means you have a 28 card deck still nets you a decent 1 mana 2/1 and damages you, which isn't even a downside in most Warlock decks, is just insane. This card has been in by far the most number of banned, hotfixed, or otherwise S-tier decks, which have almost always been Warlock decks, from basic Zoo Warlock to Cube Lock, OTK Tiller Warlock, Stealer of Souls Warlock, the thousands of variants of Darkglare Warlock, Discard Warlock, Mechathune Warlock, and by far the most degenerate of all, Questline Warlock. I think it's fair to say that Kobold Librarian has seen its fair share of play. I think the thing that really made this card so broken is that over the years, Blizzard has printed more and more cards that just negate the negative drawback of Librarian, while actually encouraging you to damage yourself more. Probably the first real card that had amazing synergy with Librarian was Darkglare, since before then it was just a really good independent card. Darkglare has the effect where after you damage yourself, it restores 2 of your mana crystals, meaning you would actually gain mana while still drawing a card. And with the revert to the Molten Giant nerf and the printing of Flesh Giant, which would both cost less the more and more damage you did to yourself, this package of cards had pretty much no counterplay. I think this is the perfect card to have at the top of this very expansive list, since it shows what happens to a card with a good effect that has a supposed drawback turned into an even better effect after a couple of expansions. Alright, and that's the video. Make sure to check out the main Hearthstone channel, link will be at the end of the video and in the video description. And also, are there any cards you think we may have missed? Or do you have any ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, let us know down in the comments.